Hi, my name is Maia Otarashvili. I'm a research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and today I'm joined by my colleague Nick Gvosdev, who is a senior fellow at FPRI, and he's the editor of our scholarly journal Orbis. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
So you have a new article on the national interest, which talks about the recent news that Russia has found a COVID vaccine, and they are way ahead of everybody else, is certainly of Washington and Beijing. So I want us to talk about this article a little bit and hear your take about it. But let's set the stage and tell us how you see Russia's COVID experience, how the government has dealt with it, and what has that looked like so far from your perspective.
Sure. Let me just start by noting that I'm not a scientist, I'm not a virologist, I don't have a background in pharmacology, so I can't assess the claims that are being made as to the efficacy of a vaccine or not. I focus more on the policy and geopolitical implications, but certainly happy to answer your question from those perspectives. I think what's important to note is that when the coronavirus pandemic began, the initial Russian response of the Kremlin was to say that Russia would not be affected by this, that this was a problem for China, it was a problem for Europe, it was a problem for the United States, but that Russia, because it had an effective government, would take steps and would prevent coronavirus from crossing the border into the Russian population. So that for the first several weeks in the spring of 2020, that was the Russian response, that they could keep coronavirus out, and that would show that Russia had a more effective government than, say, Italy, France, Spain, even the United States. When it became clear that despite whatever measures the Kremlin had taken, that coronavirus had in fact arrived in Russia, then the problem is that the virus began to stress both the Russian economy and the Russian healthcare system. And it was stressing the economy at a time when the Russian government had decided that they would withdraw from the OPEC agreement with Saudi Arabia, triggering a massive energy price war, which plunged energy prices to lowest levels we haven't seen in decades, which meant that as the virus was hitting, as global demand for energy was already falling, you now have this price war, and that was adding further stress to the economy. The Russian government said, well, we'll go into lockdown, we'll pay people salaries, but there's a sense that the virus is damaging to the Russian economy, to its productivity. There was real concerns about the virus spreading in key sectors of the economy, also within the military. What would happen if, as we saw in the United States, you start to have military units have their readiness compromised because they have too many coronavirus cases? So the Russian government then pivoted away from the virus will never come here to we have to show that we can effectively deal with the virus. And part of that has been to say that Russia can quickly find mitigation for the virus and ultimately find a way to cure the virus. And so that became the new line of the Kremlin, which is that Russia will extract itself from this crisis sooner than China, sooner than the United States, perhaps even sooner than Europe. And that's the background by which we've had this very surprise announcement from the Kremlin that Russia has apparently succeeded in coming up with something that may be a promising coronavirus vaccine.
And there's a lot of skepticism about whether or not the vaccine is actually effective, especially coming from sort of Western analysts. But for right now, it looks like there's reason to celebrate within Russia. Can you tell me a little bit about the domestic political implications of?
Sure. And let me just start with your point about the skepticism, and that is true. It hasn't gone through clinical trials. It hasn't yet been demonstrated that it works. Of course, we know that earlier this year, in the late spring and then into the summer of 2020, that computer security firms in the United States and Canada, in Europe, were detecting intrusions into pharmaceutical companies, that they ascertained were coming from Russian sources. So it does appear that there was a certain degree of cyber industrial espionage to see what pharmaceutical companies in the West were doing, what their dead ends might have been, what were promising areas of research, and if this may have helped the Russian effort, it may be a part of it. Certainly, of course, the reaction within Russia is muted, but there is a sense that Russia needs to have its own vaccine precisely because there's a lack of trust that if China or the United States or Europe develops a vaccine, that either they will not provide it to Russia or that they will hold out for concessions from Russia, or even among some segments of the Russian national security establishment, there's a sense that the United States and or China would be happy to see Russia weakened by the virus and would be slow to provide a vaccine or other abilities to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus. So certainly domestically, it has the impact, although, again, there's a certain degree of skepticism. Russians on social media are questioning, is there really a vaccine? Does it really work? There's always that sense of taking Kremlin pronouncements with a grain of salt. But the sense is that if it is true and that Russia has made this breakthrough, there's a sense that it's important for Russia not to fall behind the other major players in the world, because there's a sense that the other major countries would not be so quick to help or to aid Russia in its time of need.
And your article published in the National Interest from August 13th deals with the geopolitical aspects of the vaccine, which they've named Sputnik 5. I think this is a very interesting story, this idea of Putin having put together a group of middle powers, as you call them. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. And of course, as you just alluded to, the name of the virus is meant to evoke sort of, previous Soviet technological breakthroughs and to try to connect the current Russian government to those Soviet triumphs in the past. And it's very interesting to see what the Russians have done with this, which is that they're not holding it within, but they have reached out to the Philippines, to South Korea, to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, to Brazil, to India, to Turkey, and to say, we want to bring you into a consortium to help test the vaccine, to potentially manufacture it, to distribute it. And the countries that have all been chosen are a very interesting group of countries. They're all countries that have had either difficulties in their relationship with the United States, so whether it's Turkey, whether it's Saudi Arabia, or countries that have had difficulties with China and maybe suspicious of China's efforts to have strings attached to any coronavirus vaccine, or they're countries that Russia is cultivating to try to help Russia counterbalance against Western sanctions. It is very telling that one of the point persons for this drive to bring these countries together into a consortium for the vaccine is Kirill Dmitriev, who heads up the Russia Direct Investment Fund, effectively the Russian State Investment Fund, whether he's going to Saudi Arabia, to Korea, to other places, and essentially seeking the financing, right? And this is a way to potentially get countries to say, we're not going to necessarily support another round of financial and economic sanctions on Russia if they think that they may have access to a vaccine. And again, the pitch to some of these countries is work with Russia so that you have leverage both against Beijing and against Washington, that you don't have to necessarily follow their list of demands in order to get a vaccine. And again, because the Dmitriev's approach, particularly to Saudi Arabia, has been very interesting, is to say, look, we will work with you. You can manufacture it here. You won't necessarily be dependent on the United States. This will help build up your own capabilities, is designed to also then continue the Russian-Saudi partnership in other areas, particularly in energy. Because again, we may be looking at this as a health issue, but underneath the health issue, there's also Russia's energy future. And Russia sees its energy and economic future as linked to the Arctic. It needs investment for the Arctic. And some of these countries that it is reaching out to, South Korea, India, Saudi Arabia, are going to be the countries that Russia turns to for financing, either because the West will be under sanctions or because the Russians don't trust the strings that the Chinese have attached. So beyond the superficial level of health security, there is also geopolitical and geoeconomic factors at play.
Absolutely, and I think for now we have to stand by and see if the vaccine works, but also see how this collaboration shapes up. It's exactly. A very hard. Thank you for joining me, Nick.
Thank you.